Second Kings chapter 5. Like 2 minutes, I think. I think I read it fast enough to be 2 minutes. I think maybe Carl timed me though, so I don't know. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord. Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry. He went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in rage. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Now, I wish I could stop there, but I really can't. So I gotta keep reading just a few more verses. So bear with me. Then he returned to the man of God, and he and all his company, and he came and stood before him. And he said, "Behold, I know that there is no God in all of the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on, your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter." He said to him, "Go in peace." But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, "See, the master has spared this Naaman the Syrian, in not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi followed Naaman, and when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" And he said, "All is well. My master has sent me to say, there have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing." And Naaman, of course, said, "Be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with the 2 changes of clothing, and laid them on 2 of his servants, and they carried them before Gehazi. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house. And he sent the men away, and they departed. He went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And he said, "Your servant went nowhere." But he said to him, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, and male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever." So he went out from his presence, a leper like snow. So God bless the reading of his word. I think that was about 2 minutes. I want to start off before I really get going, I want you to meditate on that and just be thinking about it. And the question is, how much do you trust and obey God? I know there's probably something you think about a lot, but just in the privacy of your own minds, just think about how much you truly trust and truly obey God. Because you just need to be honest with yourself, because it's just between you and God. So, breaking down the scripture, Naaman had everything. It says that right there in the first verse. He was a man of high favor, but he had leprosy. In those days, we all know how bad leprosy was. A lot of times, you couldn't even live in the city gates. And I think the greatest part in this whole chapter was that girl, the servant girl, who was really a slave, just a servant in the house. She went on her faith and not only trusted God, but she obeyed God. She probably had every reason in our minds to not go and tell Naaman's wife that there's a prophet in Israel who can cure him. But she did. She did that because she trusted and obeyed God. So Naaman wants to be cured. So he has a little faith. He wants to cure his leprosy. And I'm sure, yes, it's a little selfish. So he goes to his king, and the king writes a letter to the king of Israel. And now there was some tension between Syria and Israel because Syria just conquered Israel. And whenever the king of Israel, I hope I'm not confusing y'all, the king of Israel reads the letter, and I guess there's an ulterior motive. We talked about that last night, but the king of Israel thinks this is a test. There's a quarrel going on, something's happening, but really it's just that Naaman wants to be cured of leprosy. So Elisha steps up in his faith and he says, let them see that there's a prophet in Israel, the land of God. And he steps up to him and basically says, come to me and you can be cured. So Naaman goes to him. And when Naaman sends, when Elisha sends the messenger to the door, it's very disrespectful, really, because in those times, and I think even in these times, excuse me, when someone high-ranking goes to the door, someone of high ranking has to answer the door. Well, Elisha just sends his messenger out there and just says, hey, you go dip in the Jordan River 7 times, you'll be cured. That seems simple, right? Well, Naaman didn't like that because he had his own idea of what God was going to do to heal him. And I think a lot of times we have our own idea of what God should do. And we want to see this big magic show. And we want to see these huge miracles when we should just be seeing God in everyday life, the little miracles in everyday life. And I think we should dwell on that rather than be like Naaman and have our own idea of what God should do. So he does do that. He goes and dips in the Jordan River 7 times and he is healed. So even that little bit of faith that he had, that little faith that he had ended up curing him because he did finally obey God. But in the second part of the story, Gehazi, a selfish man, a greedy man, he sees an opportunity to, I guess, have some kind of own personal gain. So Gehazi is wanting to, I guess, get all these riches, and it's pure greed. And greed is very bad because you can't see it. It's like you're trapped in a room and it's all glass walls, but you can't see it. It's a prison that you're in. So he goes back to Naaman, who's willing to give anything because he just got cured of leprosy. He uses God, basically, to build up his riches. And I think a lot of times we use God too. And I'm going to hit on that a little later. But when Gehazi came back, after getting the little bit of silver and clothing, Elisha, who was a prophet, asked Gehazi where he had been. And he says, your servant went nowhere. And I think that's funny. And if my mom was here, she would think that was funny too. Because as a kid, I've probably done some mischievous stuff. More so my brother, or Fabian, has corrupted me to do some mischievous stuff. But if you say that you've been nowhere, I think all you parents know that you better figure out where you went. So, and he's a prophet of God. I mean, come on. So, Gehazi's greed also caused him to do two other things. It caused him to steal, because he stole the silver, because he claimed that it was God. And he also had to lie. So, I think Gehazi's greed is so low, and God actually punishes him. And that's where we don't want to be, is that kind of greed that makes us do stupid things like that. And I think out of this whole story, there were three paths taken here. And only one of them really was good. And this just goes back to my first question. How much do you trust and obey God? The servant girl went God's way. You know, her situation, we can put ourselves in whatever situation that we can, and we can maybe try to have this excuse with ourselves that look at all that happened to me. She was a slave, and she still, was faithful to God. And that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to be faithful no matter what, because His plan is perfect and ours isn't. Right. And Naaman, willing to go God's way, as long as God would go His way. And I think a lot of us find ourselves there. I find ourselves there. And in a lot of situations, when my aunt was passing away several years ago, I was torn up about it. And I remember praying to God, if you will just cure her, I will witness to my family, I will do all of these things, if you'll just do this for me. And it wasn't until later when I realized that it wasn't God's plan, and I needed to trust that. And I think we do that in everyday life too. God, if you'll just give me this job, if you'll just give me this raise, I will go to church, 3 times a week, and I'll read my Bible 10 minutes more. I'll do this, or if you'll just give me this boyfriend or girlfriend, I will make sure that we'll live for you. We'll do all these things. And I think it's extremely important to realize that we can't negotiate with God. And because who are we to question Him, in His perfect plan in our life? And the third way, Gehazi went his own way and tried to make it look like God's way. And that's about as low as you can get, because you're using God. And he got punished for that. And God definitely doesn't want us to be there. He doesn't want to be used. I mean, He's in all of His love and all of His mercy and grace. He's not there to be used. He's there to dwell in your heart. And in closing, I want to just ask that y'all reflect on the question above. And I want to pray about this. And if you'll all just stand up and bow your heads. And just I want to give a moment for y'all to reflect and really ask yourself, which path have you been taking lately, or which way is God leading you? And trusting Him is one thing, and obeying Him is another thing. And He wants us to do both. So just want y'all to have a moment of silence, and then I'll say a prayer.